At its peak, Spain was the world's first true global superpower, stretching across Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Its imperial reach was so vast that a papal decree granted the Spanish crown control over half the known world. Spanish monarchs served as the temporal and spiritual guardians of Christendom against Protestant adversaries and the threat of Ottoman expansion. Their galleons transported silver, spices, and soldiers across 3 oceans, from Flanders to the Philippines. Yet, within a few centuries, Spain's global empire had nearly vanished, reduced to scattered possessions and lingering memories of former glory. Like all major empires, its ascent and decline were shaped by numerous converging factors. But what if Spain could have a second chance? Utilizing the power of hindsight, we will explore whether historical insights could have provided a lifeline for the empire. Before we start, a quick thank you to our sponsor and partner for today's video, Europa Universalis 5. I am a massive enthusiast of grand strategy games, especially the Europa Universalis series, which I've enjoyed since high school. When Paradox Interactive sent me a copy to test, I was tremendously impressed. EU5 improves upon all the elements fans cherish about the series: deep diplomacy, refined economics, and an even more realistic military and logistics system. Purchase your copy of Europa Universalis 5 on Steam today using our link in the pinned comment, and prepare to spend hundreds, if not thousands of hours in this profound strategy game. The first and most critical point is that Spain's empire did not collapse instantaneously. Its decline was caused by overlapping issues that gradually weakened its capacity to maintain a global realm. 5 of these issues are particularly notable. First was its economy. Spain possessed enormous wealth due to American silver, but this wealth created its own difficulties. The massive influx of bullion drove up prices across Europe. Furthermore, much of the acquired pesos was spent on foreign wars or luxury imports rather than developing domestic industry. The crown depended heavily on a Castilian tax base and borrowed heavily from foreign bankers, resulting in multiple payment defaults. Simultaneously, a series of plagues and the expulsion of the Moriscos depleted the crucial labor pool required for agriculture and industry. Essentially, Spain was awash in cash, but misallocating it badly. Next was the military. Typically, empires suffer from a deficit in money, manpower, or discipline. This was not the case for the Spanish, whose enormous silver reserves and troop availability were reinforced by professional forces that dominated much of the pike and shot era. The actual issue lay in geography, compounded by the complexity of crown bureaucracy. Governing an empire spanning the globe necessitated fighting on too many fronts simultaneously. Spain's armies and navies were embroiled in multi-decade wars across Western Europe and the Mediterranean, while also defending convoys across the Atlantic and Pacific. While they could readily replace material losses, Spain still faced significant setbacks, including the failed armadas of 1588 to 1601, a devastating defeat at Rocroi in 1643, and numerous major uprisings throughout the 1640s, all exposing serious vulnerabilities within the empire. With commitments distributed across such a massive domain, it was difficult for Spain to finance and pursue them all effectively. This strain also impacted the administration. The Spanish Empire was governed via a convoluted system of regional laws and councils. This structure often led to slow, contradictory decision-making. Many official posts were sold for immediate revenue, placing unqualified individuals in powerful positions. While nobles and the church were largely exempt from taxation, attempts to centralize authority frequently met with fierce opposition. The result was an administration that struggled to act decisively during crises. Nevertheless, reforms were inevitable. By the 18th century, the Bourbon dynasty attempted to replace the old patchwork of councils and courts with more unified ministry. Significant Bourbon reforms were also initiated to control Spain's most valuable asset, the Americas. Free trade was introduced across the New World, though accompanied by stricter administration. Peninsular Spaniards dominated top positions as duties were reduced and trade activity boomed. However, these new policies also alienated many locally born Creole elites whose career prospects were now being usurped by the Peninsulares. By the time Napoleon invaded Spain in 1808, the monarchy's authority collapsed. American territories were left largely unsupervised until the Bonapartes were expelled.
Even after the Bourbons returned to reassert control, the damage was irreversible. However, even earlier, Spain spent much of the 1700s struggling to keep pace with rival powers whose navies could intercept Spain's treasure fleets, seize vital ports, and flood Spanish America with contraband. Spain's slow rate of modernization left its sea lanes exposed. By the late 18th century, Spain's trade monopoly and much of its imperial revenue were fatally undermined, making it impossible to compete on the high seas. Like a magnificent aurochs, Spanish monarchs found themselves scrambling to stay ahead of the stampede. Shaky finances, perpetual warfare, a cumbersome administration, alienated elites, and powerful rivals. Unlike the Spaniards of that era, we possess the undeniable advantage of hindsight. Stepping into their shoes, let's explore whether historical insights could have provided a lifeline for the empire.
Any strategy to preserve the Spanish Empire must start with money. Wealth from the Americas was immense, but it arrived in unpredictable surges, with much of it disappearing into war debts, luxury imports, and foreign goods. Between 1526 and 1555, silver imports to Seville skyrocketed by nearly 500%. Yet by the 1630s, interest payments on royal bonds were consuming nearly half of the crown's revenue. When the fleets were delayed or lost, the treasury instantly emptied. So the first necessary fix is broadening the tax base. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the majority of the tax burden fell on Castile, the crown's heartland, while nobles and the church were largely exempt. Integrating these privileged groups into the tax system, even modestly, would make revenue more stable. This would be a challenge, but other nations, like France, eventually succeeded through negotiated contributions and gradual reforms. Next is addressing debt dependency more sustainably. Instead of selling offices or issuing more bonds to cover shortfalls, Spain could stabilize spending by prioritizing the defense of trade routes and overseas hubs over European prestige wars. This type of selective entrenchment could reduce costs and the need for emergency borrowing. It would also have the added benefit of curbing foreign influence from groups like Dutch and Genoese financiers. Finally, invest in domestic industries. Directing a portion of the bullion into Spanish shipbuilding, arms production, and textiles would decrease reliance on imports and foster a more self-sufficient economy. Even better, if the state had not expelled ethnic groups like the Moriscos, there would have been a larger pool of workers willing to contribute to this emerging industry. This wouldn't make Spain immune to future crises, but it would provide the empire with a stronger economic core, the necessary foundation to hold everything else together. Regarding the military, Spanish commitments were spread across too many fronts for too long. From the wars in Flanders to the defense of Italy, the Mediterranean, and transoceanic trade routes, every theater demanded funds, personnel, and ships. Losing any one of them could be catastrophic. The most effective way to alleviate the strain is to prioritize. This means clearly identifying which territories and trade routes are vital to the empire's survival and which can be maintained with minimal forces or even yielded through diplomacy. For instance, reducing involvement in expensive, low-return campaigns in Central Europe could free up resources to protect the Americas and the crucial sea lanes that sustained the silver flow. Another key measure would be to improve the organization of local forces and to do it sooner. The empire did not lack local militias or auxiliary troops. The true difficulty was that these men often had to finance their own arms and equipment, while the profession of soldiering required full-time dedication that few could afford. Eventually, the Bourbon reforms successfully professionalized local militias in the Americas. Our approach would mean these changes were implemented much earlier, before the empire was further destabilized. Finally, invest in domestic industries. The lifeblood of Spain's empire was the ocean. During Philip II's reign, vast amounts of crown resources were dedicated to securing the treasure route. However, later Habsburg monarchs struggled to maintain these fleets in both the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. Expanding the capacity of fast squadrons and troop transports would enable easier response to threats where they mattered most, rather than attempting to be omnipresent. By concentrating on the empire's core lifelines instead of striving for omnipresence, Spain could have maintained a strong military presence without overextending itself.
For administration, Spain's patchwork of kingdoms came with distinct laws, privileges, and councils, leading to slow and inconsistent decision-making. In an empire spanning 4 continents, delayed communication could be the difference between resolving a crisis and allowing it to spiral out of control. The first step in addressing this is professionalizing governance. Selling offices for quick revenue frequently resulted in unqualified or absentee officials. Ending the sale of key posts and appointing administrators based on merit, ideally with experience in the region they govern, would enhance the bureaucracy's effectiveness. If they could endure the concept, Spain could adopt the Dutch or English model of merit-based fiscal boards instead of endlessly expanding clerical staff. Spain's own parliament had sometimes pressed for greater oversight on crown finances, meaning a tradition of accountability existed. The monarchy simply needed to foster this attitude more consistently. Second, reduce the duplication of authority. Multiple councils and overlapping jurisdictions caused delays and confusion. Consolidating them into fewer, more specialized bodies would accelerate communication and decision-making. And finally, improve information flow. Relying solely on slow correspondence left Madrid months behind events overseas. While faster communication like the telegraph was centuries away, Spain could still establish a standardized courier relay system and empower trusted viceroys with greater autonomy to act decisively without waiting for instructions. Later ministers like the Count Duke of Olivares attempted ambitious schemes of centralization and reform, but his overreach provoked key regions like Catalonia and Portugal. More moderate, carefully negotiated reforms might have bolstered royal authority without inciting rebellion. These changes wouldn't eliminate the tensions between the empire's diverse regions, but they would give Madrid a better opportunity to coordinate, respond, and keep the machinery of empire running smoothly. Addressing Spain's lifeline in the Americas would be one of the most vital steps. Later Bourbon reforms successfully boosted trade and revenue in the New World, but they also alienated many Creole elites who saw their influence diminish as peninsular officials occupied top positions. That resentment would become a major fracture point when the monarchy faltered in 1808. A more sustainable approach would have involved sharing power, not hoarding it. Granting Creole elites increased access to higher administrative posts or military training in Spain would have more closely aligned their interests with Madrid's. Loyalty is easier to maintain when local leaders feel they have a genuine stake in the system. Tax and trade policies also required greater flexibility. While easing trade restrictions was a positive step, the benefits were not evenly distributed. More critically, it left American merchants feeling resentful of unequal opportunities, which, combined with indigenous labor abuses inherited from earlier tribute and mita systems, set the stage for rebellions like that of Tupac Amaru II in Peru. Instead, ensuring that inland and peripheral regions also benefited from reforms would have lessened the feeling that Madrid favored a few key ports at everyone else's expense. Finally, investment in local defense could provide both practical and political gains. Beyond the military benefits already discussed, having well-armed, well-trained militias led by trusted local officers would both protect against foreign threats and strengthen the bond between the territory and the crown. Thus, in addition to improving military responsiveness, this push to treat the Americas as partners rather than subordinates would have quelled local tendencies toward independence. Last of all would be to deal with Spain's main rivals. By the mid-18th century, competing powers like Britain and France had surpassed Spain in shipbuilding, finance, and industrial output. Their modern navies could intercept treasure fleets, seize key ports, and flood Spanish America with contraband. Spanish trade monopoly was fatally weakened. Closing that gap would necessitate a sustained program of naval modernization. This means dedicating a fixed portion of bullion revenue to shipyard expansion, adopting the latest warship designs, and improving gunnery and sailing training. Regular fleet exercises, even in peacetime, would keep crews prepared for combat. Equally important was securing supply lines. Establishing more fortified waypoints and supply stations along major trade routes would reduce the risk of losing entire convoys to storms or enemy action. Finally, Spain needed to rethink its naval strategy. Rather than concentrating on defending the Iberian coastline, More aggressive convoy escorts and forward-deployed squadrons in the Caribbean and Pacific could have discouraged rival powers from striking in the first place. A stronger, more modern navy wouldn't guarantee Spain's dominance, but it would make challenging its control significantly more costly for any potential rival. Each of these proposed solutions carries its own set of dangers. Broadening the tax base or sharing power with Creole elites appears obvious now, but in reality both would have been fiercely resisted by nobles, the clergy, and centralizing ministers. Cutting debt and avoiding prestige wars made fiscal sense, but dynastic alliances and the Habsburg role as the defender of the faith would have continued to drag Spain back into costly continental conflicts, regardless of policy. Even the more practical measures, such as investing in industry, strengthening militias, and modernizing the navy, all faced limitations from volatile silver revenue, entrenched monopolies, and other powers rapidly advancing in shipbuilding and trade, not to mention the very real threat of sabotage. Most efforts to reform and consolidate were also hampered by attitude. Asking monarchs to yield power or compromise with their own parliaments for the sake of stability was already a monumental request. But pushing the state itself to adopt practices from rivals like the French, Dutch, or heaven forbid, the English would have been deemed too extreme. Yet these ideals were not entirely beyond Spain's reach. The issue lay in scale, consistency, and timing. Implementing all of them simultaneously would have demanded extraordinary political will, unwavering leadership, and decades of follow-through across multiple reigns. History indicates that this is a difficult expectation for any empire. But if Spain had succeeded, the Great Aurex might not have ended in a tumble, but with the empire making it all the way to the finish line intact.